Mommy, I was quiet, I promise.
I'm here, baby, I'm here.
Who locked this door? Someone in this house has answers.
The fiancé locked the maid's toddler in the pantry, and then the billionaire heard one word. Not a scream, not a cry loud enough to stop the music, just one tiny word, shaking behind a closed wooden door while 70 wealthy guests laughed beneath crystal chandeliers in the Beaumont mansion. Daddy! Marcus Beaumont froze in the middle of his engagement dinner. For 3 seconds, no one understood why the most powerful man in the room had stopped breathing. His fiancée, Celeste Whitmore, stood beside him in a silver gown, smiling like nothing was wrong, her diamond ring catching every light in the ballroom. The violinists kept playing, champagne kept moving from tray to tray, rich people kept pretending the night was perfect. But Marcus had heard it again. Daddy, please. The word came from somewhere behind the east hallway, small, terrified, muffled by wood. And across the ballroom, a black maid named Amani Brooks dropped the silver tray in her hands, glass shattered across the marble. Her face went empty with fear before anyone else even moved, because a mother knows the sound of her child's fear before the world does. Her 4-year-old daughter, Noelle, was missing. And the woman standing next to Marcus, the woman he was supposed to marry in 6 weeks, suddenly stopped smiling. Stay with this, because that one word would end an engagement, expose a secret hidden for years, and change 3 lives forever. Hey friends, welcome back. Before we step into this story, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city or country in the comments, because stories like this travel farther than any of us expect. And if this is your first time here, subscribe and stay close, because we tell stories about truth, courage, quiet love, and the little voices adults ignore until it is almost too late. This one is emotional. It starts in a mansion full of money, but it ends with something money could never buy. The Beaumont estate sat behind iron gates on a hill just outside Atlanta, the kind of house people slowed down to stare at even when they pretended they were not looking. It had white stone pillars, long windows, imported marble floors, and a ballroom with a ceiling painted like clouds no one inside ever seemed to look up at. Everything in that house was polished, everything reflected light, but somehow, very little felt warm. Marcus Beaumont owned hotels, shipping warehouses, and half the skyline downtown. At 38, he was already the kind of man magazines called disciplined, private, untouchable. He never raised his voice, he never lost control. He moved through rooms like a man who had learned early that power was quieter when it did not need to explain itself. But the mansion was lonely. Staff entered before sunrise and left after midnight. Flowers were replaced before they wilted. Silver was cleaned before anyone noticed fingerprints. Meals appeared. Rooms were reset. Cars waited at the front steps. Marcus paid well. He was not cruel, but he rarely looked long enough to see the people keeping his world from collapsing. That was why Amani Brooks had survived there for almost 11 months. Amani was 30 years old, with deep brown skin, tired eyes that still held dignity, and hands that looked delicate until you noticed how much strength they carried. She wore the plain black dress and white apron required of house staff, but even in uniform there was something graceful about her. Not softness, survival, the kind that came from raising a child alone and still waking up every morning with gentleness left in your voice. Her daughter Noelle was 4. Noelle had round cheeks, dark curls tied with yellow ribbons, and a habit of holding her mother's sleeve whenever adults spoke too sharply. She carried a tiny gold heart locket on a chain too long for her little neck, so Amani usually tucked it beneath her collar. The locket had a dent on one side, and a photograph inside that Amani never opened around anyone. Noelle called it her sun heart, because when light touched it, it flashed warm against her small fingers. Amani had tried not to bring Noelle to the mansion at first. But childcare failed the way life often fails poor women, suddenly and without apology. So Noelle came on days when Amani had no choice, staying in the back kitchen with coloring pages, crackers, and her stuffed lamb named Peaches. Noelle was quiet in the way some children become quiet when they understand too early that their mother's job depends on them being invisible. But she noticed everything. She noticed which staff members limped after long shifts. She noticed when Marcus skipped breakfast. She noticed Celeste's smile never reached her eyes. And once, 3 weeks before the engagement dinner, she noticed something no adult in that mansion was supposed to see. Celeste Whitmore arrived at the Beaumont estate like she was accepting ownership of it. She was 29, beautiful in a sharp, expensive way, with pale skin, glossy auburn hair, perfect posture, and the kind of voice that sounded sweet until it cut. Her family had money, but not Beaumont money, and everyone close to her understood that marrying Marcus would turn her from wealthy into untouchable. She understood it most of all. At first, Celeste was polite to Amani, polite in public, polite when Marcus was in the room. She called her sweetheart in a tone that made the word feel like a stain. But when Marcus was gone, her eyes changed. Staff children shouldn't wander, Celeste told Amani one afternoon, watching Noelle sit on the kitchen floor with crayons. She stays in the service area, ma'am, Amani said quietly. Celeste looked down at Noelle's yellow ribbons. Children like that don't know where they belong unless someone teaches them. Amani lowered her eyes, not because she agreed, because rent was due, because groceries were expensive, because one wrong answer could make her daughter hungry. Noelle watched Celeste from behind her mother's skirt, one small hand pressed over the gold locket beneath her shirt. "What's that around her neck?" Celeste asked. Amani's fingers tightened around the dish towel. "Just a family keepsake." Celeste smiled. "How sweet, even the help has heirlooms." Amani said nothing, but Noelle did, very softly, almost to herself. "Pretty lady has a mean mouth." The kitchen went silent. Amani turned cold. Celeste's smile vanished for half a second, then it returned, smaller and sharper. She crouched in front of Noelle, close enough that the child leaned back. "You should be careful, little girl," Celeste whispered. "Pretty houses have dark corners." That was the first warning. But no one in that mansion knew what the child would see next. 3 days later, Amani was folding linens near the guest wing when Noelle wandered toward the east hallway chasing Peaches, her stuffed lamb, which had slipped from her arms. She found the toy near Marcus's private study door, but before she could pick it up, she heard Celeste's voice inside. Noelle did not understand adult secrets. She understood angry voices. She understood when someone was pretending. Celeste was on the phone. "No, Marcus doesn't suspect anything," she said. "After the wedding, the foundation accounts will be under my access. I only need his signature on the revised trust paperwork. The old woman's charity money is just sitting there." There was a pause, then Celeste laughed. "The maid? Please, she's nothing, though the child keeps staring at me like she understands English." Noelle hugged Peaches tightly. Celeste came out seconds later and found the little girl standing there. For one moment, both of them froze. Then Celeste smiled. "What did you hear?" Noelle blinked. "You said mommy is nothing." Celeste's face hardened. She grabbed Noelle's small arm, not enough to bruise badly, but enough for the child to remember. "You listen to me," Celeste whispered. "If you tell anyone you were here, your mommy will disappear from this house. Do you understand?" Noelle's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. That night, Amani noticed her daughter would not let go of Peaches. She noticed the red mark on her arm. She asked what happened. Noelle only said, "The pretty lady doesn't like mommy." Amani's heart knew there was more. But fear has a way of closing a mother's throat, especially when that mother has no backup plan. Marcus noticed Amani for the first time on a rainy morning in April. He came down early, sleepless from a board call that had gone wrong, and found her in the kitchen warming milk for Noelle. The child was sitting at the counter, swinging her little legs, the gold locket shining against her pajama shirt because Amani had forgotten to tuck it away. Marcus stopped in the doorway. Amani straightened quickly. "Mr. Beaumont, I'm sorry, we'll move." "No," he said, surprising himself with how fast the word came. "It's fine." Noelle looked up at him with solemn eyes. "You look sad," she said. Amani's face went horrified. "Noelle?" Marcus almost smiled. "Almost. Do I?" Noelle nodded. "Like the big house." Something about that made the kitchen still. Marcus looked at the child, then at the room around him, at the staff entrance, the untouched breakfast, the rain sliding down the windows. For years, people had called his life impressive. No one had ever compared him to a sad house. "What would make the house less sad?" he asked. Noelle thought seriously. "Pancakes, and songs, and yellow flowers." For the first time that week, Marcus laughed. Amani stared at him. Not because it was loud. It was not. It was small, almost unfamiliar, like a sound he had not used in years. After that, Marcus began appearing in the kitchen more often. He told himself it was because he liked the early quiet, because the coffee was better there, because meetings had become unbearable, and the kitchen felt like a room where no one wanted anything from him. But the truth was simpler. Noelle made him feel seen without asking him to perform. Amani made the room feel peaceful without trying. Celeste noticed. And jealousy, when mixed with pride, becomes dangerous. The engagement dinner was supposed to be Celeste's triumph. 70 guests, white roses, live violinists, gold-rimmed plates, a photographer from a luxury magazine. Celeste had planned every detail down to the color of the napkins and the angle of the candles. She wanted the night to say one thing clearly: she belonged in the Beaumont mansion. Amani worked the event with the catering staff. She had begged her neighbor to watch Noelle, but the neighbor's son had fallen sick that morning, so Noelle came along, dressed in a simple yellow dress, her curls tied neatly, peaches tucked under one arm, the gold locket hidden beneath her collar. "Stay in the kitchen," Amani whispered, kneeling in front of her. "No hallways tonight, okay?" Noelle nodded. "Because pretty lady has dark corners." Amani's breath caught. "What did you say?" Before Noelle could answer, Mrs. Hargrove, the older housekeeper, called Amani to the ballroom. A tray was waiting, guests were arriving, the night was moving too fast. Amani kissed Noelle's forehead. "Stay right here, promise?" "Promise, but promises are fragile things in houses full of adults who don't listen." For almost an hour, Noelle stayed in the kitchen. She colored quietly. She fed invisible soup to Peaches. She watched staff rush in and out. Then Celeste entered. Not through the main kitchen door, through the side hallway, where guests would not see her. She was smiling, but her eyes were bright with anger. "You," she said. Noelle looked up. Celeste crossed the kitchen and grabbed the child's wrist. "I told your mother to keep you out of sight." "I'm in the kitchen," Noelle whispered. "You're in my house. It's Mr. Marcus's house." The slap did not come. Celeste was too careful for that. Instead, she bent down, her diamonds glittering near Noelle's face. "Do you want your mommy fired tonight?" Noelle shook her head quickly. "Then you're going to sit somewhere quiet until this party is over." She pulled Noelle down the service hall toward the old pantry, a narrow storage room beside the wine corridor. It smelled of flour, lemon oil, and wood. Celeste pushed the door open. Noelle clutched Peaches. "I don't like dark." "Then close your eyes." Celeste guided her inside, not roughly enough to leave marks, but firmly enough to terrify. Noelle stumbled against a shelf. A small tin of sugar fell and rolled across the floor. "Please," Noelle whispered. "Mommy said stay kitchen." Celeste leaned in. "Your mommy should have learned her place before bringing you here." Then she shut the door. The lock clicked. Noelle stood in the dark. At first she did not scream. She pressed her back to the door, both hands wrapped around Peaches, trying to be good, trying to be quiet, trying not to make mommy lose her job. She could hear music through the walls, laughter, glasses, a world continuing without her. Then the pantry seemed to get smaller. She knocked once. "Miss Pretty Lady?" No answer. She knocked harder. "I'm sorry." Still nothing. In the ballroom, Celeste returned to Marcus's side just as he lifted his glass for the toast. She smoothed her gown. Her smile was perfect again. Amani looked toward the kitchen every few minutes, worry growing behind her ribs. She asked one of the servers to check on Noelle. He came back and said he hadn't seen her. That was when Amani's hands began to shake. She set down her tray and moved toward the service hall. Celeste saw her. "Where are you going?" Celeste asked softly, blocking her path near the ballroom entrance. "My daughter," Amani whispered. "I need to check on her." Celeste tilted her head. "Your daughter is not the guest of honor. Please move." A few nearby guests turned. Celeste's smile widened. "Careful, Amani. You're working." Amani felt humiliation burn her face. The room was full of powerful people, but none of them knew what was happening behind the wall. None of them knew a little girl was standing in darkness, trying to be brave. Then Marcus began his toast. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he said, voice calm, one hand lightly touching Celeste's back. "This house has been many things over the years, a home, a workplace. Sometimes, if I'm honest, a very quiet museum." Guests chuckled politely. He paused, eyes drifting for a moment toward the kitchen, almost expecting to see Noelle's yellow ribbons at the doorway. But she was not there. And that was when he heard it, a tiny sound behind the east wall. "Daddy," his hand lowered. Celeste's smile froze. Marcus stopped speaking. The violinists continued for 2 notes, then faltered as the silence spread outward. Guests looked at one another. Someone coughed. Amani turned completely pale. Then the word came again. "Daddy, please open." Marcus placed his glass on the nearest table so carefully it made no sound. "Where is that coming from?" he asked. Celeste laughed too quickly. "Probably one of the staff children playing. You know how they—" "Stop." One word, quiet, final. Amani moved before anyone could stop her. She ran down the east hallway, Marcus behind her, guests beginning to follow at a distance. Celeste reached for his arm. Marcus, don't make a scene. He looked at her hand on his sleeve until she removed it. The sound came again, smaller now. Mommy? Amani reached the pantry door and pulled the handle. Locked. Noelle, she cried. Baby, I'm here. Inside, something scraped against the door. Mommy, I was quiet, I promise. Marcus's face changed, not anger first, something colder, something breaking open behind his eyes. Who locked this door? He asked. No one answered. Mrs. Hargrove hurried forward with keys, hands trembling. It took her 3 tries to fit the right one into the lock. When the door opened, Noelle stood in the dark with flour on her yellow dress, cheeks wet, peaches crushed against her chest, and her gold locket hanging outside her collar. Amani dropped to her knees and pulled her daughter into her arms. I'm sorry, Noelle whispered. I didn't tell about the papers. Amani went still. Marcus heard it. Celeste did too. What papers? Marcus asked. Noelle looked over her mother's shoulder at him. Her little face was swollen from crying, but her eyes were clear. The pretty lady said you can't know. She said Mommy is nothing. She said after wedding she gets the charity money. The hallway became so silent the chandelier crystals in the ballroom seemed loud. Celeste stepped forward. This is absurd. She's 4. She doesn't know what she heard. Noelle pressed her face into Amani's shoulder. I know the word charity. Mommy says charity means helping. Marcus turned to Celeste. What is she talking about? Celeste's mouth opened, then closed. She's confused. She was probably listening to staff gossip. Amani held Noelle tighter. Mr. Beaumont, I need to tell you something. Celeste snapped. Don't you dare. Marcus did not look away from Amani. Tell me. Amani swallowed. For 11 months, she had kept her head down. She had protected her child through silence. She had allowed rich people to look through her because being invisible kept food on the table. But now Noelle's small body was trembling in her arms, and silence had become danger. 3 weeks ago, Amani said, voice shaking, Noelle heard Miss Whitmore on the phone outside your study. She said something about foundation accounts and trust paperwork. I didn't know the full meaning. But that night Noelle had a red mark on her arm. Marcus's jaw tightened. Amani reached beneath Noelle's collar and lifted the gold locket. And there's something else. Celeste's eyes flashed toward the necklace. Marcus noticed. Amani opened the locket with trembling fingers. Inside was a tiny photograph, old and worn at the edges. A young woman stood beside Amani years earlier, smiling in sunlight. Around the woman's neck was the same gold heart locket. Marcus took 1 step closer. The color left his face. That's my mother, he whispered. Amani nodded, tears rising. Yes, sir. Marcus stared at the photograph like the floor had shifted beneath him. Where did you get this? Amani looked down at Noelle, then back at him. Your mother gave it to me 12 years ago. Here is what nobody in that hallway knew. Before Amani was a maid in the Beaumont mansion, before Noelle, before the uniform and the quiet apologies, she had been a nursing assistant at St. Agnes Hospital. She was 18 then, working nights, studying during breaks, sending money home to her younger brothers. Marcus's mother, Evelyn Beaumont, had spent her final months in that hospital after a long illness the family had kept private. Marcus was overseas closing the deal that would make him famous. His father visited rarely, but Amani had been there. She brushed Evelyn's hair, read to her, sat with her during the long hours when pain made sleep impossible. Evelyn spoke often about her son, Marcus, the boy who carried too much. Marcus, who had been taught to win but not to rest. Marcus, who needed someone kind enough to tell him the truth. On Evelyn's last night, she had pressed the gold heart locket into Amani's palm. If you ever need help, Evelyn whispered, go to my son, tell him his mother said kindness is a debt we pay forward. Amani had never used it, not when she lost her scholarship. Not when Noelle's father disappeared, not when rent doubled, not when she took work through an agency and realized the house she had been assigned to was the Beaumont estate. She told herself Marcus would not remember her. She told herself the locket was just a memory. She told herself not to ask rich people for anything. But Celeste had seen it one afternoon, and Celeste had recognized Evelyn Beaumont's initials engraved on the back. That was why she had started watching Noelle. That was why she hated the child's necklace. Because Amani was not just the help, she was a witness to something pure in the Beaumont family, something Celeste could not control. Marcus held the locket in his palm, thumb brushing the tiny engraved letters, E.B., his mother's locket, his mother's face, his mother's last kindness, hanging around the neck of a child Celeste had locked in a pantry. He looked at Amani. Why didn't you tell me? Amani's voice broke. Because people like me learn not to knock on doors like yours unless we're carrying a tray. That landed harder than any accusation. Celeste moved quickly. Marcus, this is emotional manipulation. She kept your mother's jewelry for years and now suddenly produces it at our engagement dinner. You cannot seriously believe you knew about the locket, Marcus said. Celeste blinked. You looked at it before she opened it. I've seen it on the child. That doesn't mean… Marcus turned to Mrs. Hargrove. Bring Mr. Vale from the study. Celeste went rigid. Mr. Vale was Marcus's private attorney. He had been at the dinner as a guest. Minutes later, a gray-haired man in a navy suit arrived. Confusion on his face until Marcus handed him the locket. Evelyn Beaumont's? Mr. Vale asked softly. Marcus nodded. You recognize it? Of course, your mother wore it for 30 years. Celeste's breathing changed. Marcus looked at her. And the foundation paperwork. Mr. Vale frowned. What paperwork? The revised trust documents Celeste wanted me to sign after the wedding. Mr. Vale turned slowly toward Celeste. Miss Whitmore sent my office amended administrative requests last week. I rejected them because they would have given her unusual access after marriage. I assumed you knew. Marcus's face went still. Celeste whispered, Marcus, I can explain. Noelle lifted her head from Amani's shoulder. In a tiny voice she said, That's the paper she said to hide. Everyone looked at her. Noelle pointed with one small finger toward Celeste's silver clutch. Celeste stepped back. Marcus extended his hand. Open it. No. The word was too fast. The hallway seemed to shrink around her. Open it, Marcus repeated. Celeste laughed, but it shook. This is insane. You're letting a maid's child humiliate me in front of everyone. Marcus's voice dropped. You locked a child in a pantry. She was interfering with my night. The words came out before she could stop them. A collective gasp moved through the guests standing behind them. Amani covered Noelle's ears, but it was too late. The truth was already standing in the hallway. Marcus took the clutch from Celeste's frozen hand and opened it. Inside was a folded document. Mr. Vale took it, scanned the first page, then looked up with visible disgust. This is a transfer authorization, he said, for the Beaumont Children's Relief Fund. Marcus looked at Celeste as if seeing her for the first time. She tried to recover. It wasn't theft. It was restructuring. You don't understand how these public foundations… My mother created that fund, Marcus said. Celeste's lips trembled with fury. Your mother is dead, Marcus. I am the one standing beside you now. Amani flinched. Marcus did not. No, he said quietly. You were standing beside my money. The silence after that was absolute. Then Celeste made her final mistake. She looked at Amani and hissed, This is your fault. You and that little brat should have stayed invisible. Marcus stepped between them so fast, Celeste stumbled back. You didn't need to know who she was, he said, voice low and controlled, to treat her like a human being. Celeste's face went white. Marcus removed the engagement ring from her finger himself, not violently, not dramatically, but with a calm that made the moment final. This engagement is over. Gasps rippled through the hallway. Celeste looked around for support and found none. The same guests who had smiled at her an hour earlier now looked away, ashamed to have admired her. Mrs. Hargrove stood straighter. Mr. Vale folded the document and placed it in his jacket pocket. Amani held Noelle close, barely breathing. Celeste's eyes filled, not with regret, but humiliation. You'll regret this, she whispered. Marcus looked at the locked pantry door, then at the child still shaking in her mother's arms. I already regret letting you into this house. Security escorted Celeste out through the side entrance so the photographers would not catch her crying, but guests saw enough. Rich people talk quietly, but they talk. By morning the engagement was finished everywhere that mattered. But that was not the part of the story that healed anything. The healing began after the guests left. Amani sat with Noelle in the small staff sitting room, rocking her gently while Mrs. Hargrove brought warm milk and a blanket. Noelle had stopped crying, but every few minutes she looked toward the door as if afraid it might lock again. Marcus stood outside for a long time before knocking. May I come in? He asked. Amani looked up, surprised by the question. Yes, sir. He stepped inside without his jacket, tie loosened, face tired in a way power could not hide. He crouched in front of Noelle, keeping enough distance not to scare her. I'm sorry, he said. Noelle watched him carefully. I should have heard you sooner, he continued. I should have seen what was happening in my own house. Noelle's small hand moved to her locket. Mommy says grown-ups don't see corners. Amani closed her eyes. Marcus swallowed. Your mommy is right. Noelle held Peaches toward him. She was scared too. Marcus accepted the stuffed lamb like it was something precious. Then I'm sorry to Peaches too. For the first time that night, Noelle almost smiled. Amani looked at him then, really looked, and saw not the billionaire everyone feared disappointing, but the son of a woman she had once comforted through pain. Evelyn Beaumont had been right. Kindness was a debt, and somehow, after 12 years it had returned to this room. In the weeks that followed, Marcus changed the estate rules. No staff child would ever be treated as a burden. The old pantry lock was removed the next morning. The service hallway was repainted. The kitchen table, once reserved only for staff meals between shifts, became a place where Marcus sometimes sat with coffee while Noelle colored beside him. He did not try to replace anyone in Amani's life. He did not make grand promises or turn gratitude into control. He simply showed up. He created a college fund for Noelle in Evelyn Beaumont's name. He promoted Amani to household manager after Mrs. Hargrove retired, with full benefits and a salary that made Amani cry in the privacy of her room because dignity feels overwhelming when you have lived too long without it. And the locket? Marcus had it repaired by the same jeweler who had made it for his mother decades before. When he returned it to Noelle, the dent was gone, but the photograph remained. Noelle opened it and pointed at Evelyn's smiling face. She has kind eyes, she said. Marcus nodded, voice thick. She did. Like Mommy. Amani turned away quickly, pretending to adjust flowers on the counter. Marcus saw her wipe her eyes. Months later, on what would have been Evelyn Beaumont's birthday, Marcus invited a small group of children from the Beaumont Relief Fund to the estate. No cameras, no donors, no speeches for applause. Just lunch, music, yellow flowers, and children running across lawns that had once been too perfect for joy. Noelle wore her yellow ribbons and her gold heart locket. She ran through the garden with Peaches under one arm, laughing so loudly that even the old stone house seemed to soften. Marcus stood beside Amani on the terrace. My mother would have loved this, he said. Amani smiled. Noelle said the house is less sad now. Marcus looked at the bright garden, the open doors, the staff laughing with guests, the sunlight touching the marble floors. She was right. Of course she was. Children often are. They notice what adults decorate over. They hear what powerful people whisper. They feel cruelty before anyone names it. And sometimes, when the whole room is pretending not to see, a child's small voice becomes the only honest sound left. That night did not matter because a rich man ended an engagement. It mattered because a little girl who had been told to stay invisible was finally heard. It mattered because a mother who had spent years swallowing fear finally spoke. It mattered because cruelty exposed itself, and kindness answered. So maybe the question is not whether you live in a mansion or a small apartment, whether people know your name or pass you in the hallway without looking. Maybe the question is simpler. When someone small speaks, do you listen? When someone powerless is hurt, do you move? And when truth comes from an unexpected voice, are you brave enough to open the door? If this story touched your heart, like the video, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories about love, courage, and the quiet truths that change everything. And the next story begins with a little boy at a billionaire's wedding holding a box the bride begged him not to open.